organization now known as Al-Qaeda. Her pioneering work helped lay the foundation for the efforts of the analyst and targeting officers who eventually found bin Laden's hideout. We are honored to have her here today and can't wait to hear from her about gathering and reacting to intelligence data. Please welcome Cynthia Storer.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Is this on? Okay, cool. So I'm really honored to be here to speak to all of you today. And I'd like to start with a question. How many of you have seen Zero Dark 30? Oh, good. I'm not Maya. First of all, I don't look anything like Maya. But also, you know, if everybody who was involved in that is basically not allowed to talk about it. So I'm here because I left the agency a couple of years before that and wasn't involved. But what I'm talking about is the process that we went through of adapting to a changing world and to new kinds of threats, and the steps along the way and what that meant for technology and for the workforce and for things like that. So let me start with something that a lot of people don't talk about, which is your mindset when you go into looking at data. Now, we all know you can take the same information and you can tell different stories with it. All you have to do is watch Fox News and MSNBC at the same time on any night, right? So for me, one of the things that was so important in shaping my mindset as I approached data was a major event of the 1970s. Oh, I'm supposed to be. Dude. Yeah, I mean, this was my first exposure to science fiction and to futurists and how they think, right? So one of the basics of looking into the future is realizing that people are people. Yes, technologies change. Yes, the way people use it change. Different generations expect different things, but there are some things still that are fundamentally human, that translate from era to era, and that allows you to look into the future with some measure of assurance and do projections. Now, a couple years after this movie came out, two things happened that began this fundamental change in the world that we're still dealing with and forced the agency to start trying to adapt. The first of these was the Iranian Revolution in Iran, the Iranian Revolution. This was the first Islamic revolutionary movement to succeed in the 20th century. I mean, there have been many attempts. This one stuck. And so it inspired all of the others. Even though they're a minority sect, the Shia, and most of the rest are Sunni, it was still an example of what everyone could do. It was like the Arab Spring. The same year, in what as a gamer I'd have to refer to as an epic fail in foreign policy, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. So now you have all these energized groups all over the world who have a battlefield to go to learn how to fight. And they were called there by some clerics who said, your obligation as a Muslim, all Muslims, is to help the Afghans fight off the godless communists. We were doing the same thing. We were helping the Afghans fight off the godless communists, right? We funded the Afghan groups through the Pakistanis. Saudi Arabia and a lot of other Muslim countries, as well as a lot of wealthy individuals, funded people to come from all over the world to fight as a jihad, as a holy war. Join the Caravan is one of those pamphlets that was released to inspire people to go. It was distributed as a book, but they also were very clever in communicating this as the years went by and the movement grew, called the Islamic Awakening, to get people to think about changing the way their governments worked. They started producing their own magazines. Some groups had their own television and radio. They distributed audio and videotapes hand to hand to make it hard for the intelligence services to get their hands on them, right? So they were using communications in what at that time was a different way than the intelligence agencies were used to trying to pick it up. So one of the leaders of this group, Sheikh Abdul Azam, now a former director of the CIA named James Woolsey said, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and we went from a bipolar world, mostly ruled by the Soviet Union and by the competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, that we went from fighting a dragon to a world full of poisonous snakes. And the person, this is the old presentation. Okay, sorry, it's gonna be a little off. The person who helped to organize all of this was Azam's deputy, bin Laden. They put together a council in Pakistan that organized this worldwide network to recruit, train, fund, travel, all of it, for up to 200,000 people over a 10-year period, okay? When the war ended, bin Laden and some of the other guys on the council, who were already members of terrorist groups who had gone to Afghanistan to learn to fight, right? They decided that they didn't want to just help people who'd been invaded by foreigners. They wanted to overthrow governments. So they actually instituted a coup, and they took over this worldwide network. Now, we knew there was a network. We didn't have enough data to know the extent and how it all worked and all that kind of stuff. But we saw little bits of it. For instance, in New York, the police there and the FBI were able to disrupt several plots that had to do with the efforts of bin Laden and people around him to take over this worldwide network. So now, what's building as the new threat of the late 20th century is not a dragon with nuclear weapons and, huge bombers and warships, but a global network. This was a shock to the system. There's our snakes. So what people thought was, it's a world full of poisonous snakes, this is really difficult, but what they didn't suspect is that one of those snakes is actually a dragon. Not yet. Now, in terms of information trying to handle this, we used information sources basically left over from the Cold War, from the Afghan War. And we had not very much. So if you're talking about the development of big data, we're on the low end here. But we're using the same kind of methods because we're not getting, this is the structure of the government and this is their 5-year plan. We're getting Abu Muhammad, who has a limp, called this guy on that phone number, and we don't know who he is. And by the way, we don't know who Abu Muhammad is either. And we really don't know what they're up to, except we know they don't like us very much. So we're dealing with a lot of the same kinds of problems with just less volume in terms of the data. So traditional sources that we had to justify practically every 6 months because the government wanted a peace dividend. Congress wanted a peace dividend. We're done with the Soviet Union. We can just forget about all of this. And we can save money. What we were trying to say was there's a new threat, and rather than thinking about saving money, you need to move your money to a new problem. Well, that took the decade. Well, it actually took 9/11 to really get all the way through. But we made some progress over time. Now, besides these traditional sort of electronic and spies and stuff like that, we were also starting to pick up all these handwritten documents from all over the world. Because what happened was these guys left Afghanistan, they went home, they formed terrorist groups, and they started blowing stuff up. And so there were a lot of police investigations. And the United States, being sort of still the only superpower, the biggest, baddest, and the biggest intelligence service on the planet, we were the connectors. We're the ones who went out and said, hey, what's going on? You're seeing these guys. Let's talk about what's happening. Let's share some data. It's really difficult, though, because we figure there are people from almost every country in the world who went to Afghanistan who wrote their own personal diaries in their own home language. There were training manuals written in dialects of, for instance, try to find somebody in 1993 who had a top secret security clearance and knew an obscure dialect of Somali. Right? These were the challenges that we had with this. Okay, so we got Windows systems late 80s, early 90s, right? This was my actually first computer in 1986. Now, that caused a cultural change. So, first of all, even though you now have a Windows system, you still have to keyword everything, and you can't pull little bits of data out of it, right? You have to read whole reports, and then you have to figure out how to save your bits of data somewhere else. Secondly, people had been used to dealing in paper. And when you work in the information world, information is power. So the old guys in the office, right, they would hide the information from each other. Well, now everybody has it on their desktop. Oh boy, that was a rough transition. So here we are using this sort of stuff. And we're like this. You guys know the story of the blind man and the elephant? Right? Everybody's kind of blindfolded, and they've got a piece of the picture. I've got this thing here that's kind of like a tree trunk. I've got this thing over here that feels like a sword. This is a wall. What, you know. Is it all connected? Some people thought yes, some people thought no. Is it an elephant, a rhinoceros, a pile of goo, a spider web? Endless arguments about that. Now, I had two young male colleagues who wrote about this for the president. 1993, they were working on a big study. And we were working on the Afghan desk. That's why we saw this happening. Our keyword in our profile for this information to come into our inbox was Afghanistan. So anytime these guys went to another country and they blew stuff up, they were veterans of Afghanistan, so we saw it. We're the first to see it because it was all coming into us. Okay. So they were writing to the president saying, we have a problem, and this is strategic warning. This thing is starting to happen. They don't like us very much. They're now doing terrorist kind of training instead of just guerrilla war training in Afghanistan. And they're going to come after us at some point. That sat upstairs with the staff of the President's Daily Brief for 2 weeks because, I quote, the president didn't ask that question. So much for strategic warning. 2 weeks later, boom. One set of these guys, including some of the guys in New York that the FBI had been following, and a man you may be familiar with, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, set off a car bomb under the World Trade Center. We get a call, ring, ring, ring. I happened to be the one answering the phone because the other two were running around, you can imagine. Hello? What do you know about these Afghan Arabs? It's a good thing I was young then. I was more polite than I would be now. Yeah. So this starts to get some interest. Now, one of the problems we had was information sharing. The rules were such that it was very difficult for the FBI to share information with the CIA because they're all about prosecution. Any information that has to do with prosecution goes into a black hole. So CIA is trying to look at the worldwide network related to this without the warehouse full of information that the FBI has seized on this case. So that's a problem. 2 years later, Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and a bunch of other guys, who we later figure out are al-Qaeda leaders and al-Qaeda cells, they put together a plot to blow up multiple US airliners over the Pacific. Sound familiar? Project Bojinka. The reason this was disrupted was because the Philippine police were following these guys. And I don't know if you've ever known a lot of rednecks who did bomb making when they were young. You tend to blow up body parts, and it happens. So what these guys did was they set fire to their apartment in Manila. And the police moved in, and some of the main characters got away, but they got a couple of them, and they picked up all their stuff, and they figured out there was a plot, and it was disrupted at 11:59, so to speak, and it would make an awesome movie. Very scary. Now, this gets lots of congressional attention now, relatively speaking. And they asked the agency to set up a unit to look at this. So now we have a dedicated unit, very small, to look at this problem. Pretty quickly, this group of people who were mostly analysts who then went over to the operations side. So CIA has your operations folks who go out and sort of get the bad guys, right, or collect information. They're the spies. And then you have your analyst types like me who try to pull it all together, make sense of it, inform the policymakers, all that kind of stuff. So these operations folks going around the world talking to everybody about all the information they're getting, trying to create this global network among various intelligence and police services, and that was the different thing, talking to police services, pretty quickly came up with a picture something like this of they're everywhere. Now, can you imagine, maybe it's hard to think back, but try to imagine 1996 telling someone that there's a worldwide network of people who want to blow us up. They're like, what? I even had a congressional staffer say that we were making it all up to justify our jobs. Again, good thing I was younger. Now, to make matters even more difficult, most of the people doing this were women. And this was true worldwide. And actually, there's still a lot of truth to this worldwide, I understand. I don't know why. All I know is that women self-selected to do this sort of thing, led by men, but worker bees being mostly women. Is there a difference in the way our brains work? Probably, but I'm not qualified to talk about that, okay? What I am going to talk about, though, is the effect it had on our ability to communicate the message. Because at the time, there was a heck of a lot of sexism. And if you doubt me, and you can look this up, the women of the Directorate of Operations filed a class action lawsuit against the Directorate, and they won twice. Okay? And then there were all these, what a friend of mine in academia calls the old white guy syndrome. Sorry, guys. But it's very true in the agency. This is the way we do things this way, you guys, I don't know what you're doing, so we're gonna say you're wasting resources over here because you're doing this weird thing that we don't know anything about, so we're gonna undercut you so that you don't mess up our work against Iran and some of these other important targets, right? And they did it by playing on female stereotypes. And they would say, oh, what do little girls know about warfare or the Middle East, right? Are you having a bad day, dear? Are you, is it that time? And then when they got really desperate, you would comment on people's shoes. I had somebody do that in my office. Comment on a colleague's, well, those are stupid, ugly shoes. Okay. Now the problem here is that whenever you downplay someone's work based on something that has nothing to do with the work, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And in this case, it was a national security problem, obviously. So this was difficult. I put up here, I can't really show most of the people, so the folks up in the top are analysts, most of whom actually came to work this topic a little bit later. And then the lady down in the chair became a chief of base in Afghanistan, and she was blown up by a terrorist. Now, people said, you guys, later, 9/11 Commission, you guys didn't connect the dots. Well, there's the dots, folks. And this is without the kind of data streams we have now, right? As a friend of mine says, I can tell you any story I want with those dots. I could tell you that Britney Spears was going to be attacked in the Mall of America on a particular day, because we had the information. Did we believe it? No. But you could tell that story, right? So what it's really about is not connecting dots. This is not a child's diagram. If I connect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to get an elephant. It's really about understanding a universe in which these people operate. You're trying to get at the galaxies and the constellations and the gravity and the forces and all that kind of stuff and how it all works and who these people are. So we developed a couple of ways of talking to people about this. One of this was the universe, kind of a star patterns. And the other one was jigsaw puzzles, which I just found out last night one of your folks does. So jigsaw puzzle-wise, who's worked them? A few people, okay. Well, if you have a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, it still has to fit on the table, so the pieces are this big. And you're not getting a lot of information from each piece, because it's just a little splotch of color, generally, or multiple colors. And so what you do normally is you try to find the edge pieces to frame it, and then you look at the picture. So imagine no edge pieces, no picture. You have maybe 25% of the 12 puzzle pieces, The rest of them are other puzzle pieces mixed in. You have pieces falling out of the sky at random intervals, some of which you asked for and some of which you didn't, and some of which you don't even know are coming in. And then, as my imagery analysis friends, the geospatial folks would say, some of them are under the couch. That's what we were doing, trying to figure out this universe with that crazy bits of data. Now, if you put together a worldwide organization and you put together a link chart of that, you end up with spaghetti. I don't know if you guys have ever seen those amazing network diagrams where there's 5 million lines and they're everywhere and they make no sense. So back in the day, all of that had to be done by hand, so you ended up with something that looked like spaghetti. So we're trying to do this work with first-generation Word, first-generation Excel, and first-generation Analyst Notebook. Word didn't have a universal search function across all the different documents you would create. Excel hated text. I mean, it flipped out and changed the lines. It was a disaster. In Analyst Notebook, you had to enter everything by hand. So now you needed a lot more analysts than you had before, but we actually have less because of the savings from the Cold War, right? In addition to which, the system, the database system, still can't store scanned material and handwritten material. You can't do anything with that stuff. So we ended up storing it in Lotus Notes. I hear some of you worked with Lotus Notes. Now, it was great at the time. It was the new best thing. And I no longer had to put on tennis shoes and run around the building to share paper with people. Great. But there was a server capacity problem. So it wasn't long before I would start getting these emails saying, you have to delete some of your information because the server is full. And I would write back, no, this is my information database, so I'm not deleting any information. No, really, you have to do that. Third or fourth time, I finally went to my manager and I said, I'm chasing bad guys. I'm not deleting my data. Apparently, I'm not the only one who did that because the agency did the right thing, and before the whole system imploded, they bought a lot more servers. This is one thing about being in counterterrorism. When some people in Congress are interested, they'll throw some money at, stuff like that. All right, so if you were not an early adopter of technology, you still had paper on your desk. One of my colleagues who worked on this topic, sorry, I just want to check the time. One of my colleagues who worked on this topic, her desk looked like this. That's what it looked like, because she liked to work in paper. The FBI uses the black filing cabinet. And I'll tell you, trying to work a terrorist attack when you're the only CIA analyst assigned to it, having to rifle through the black filing cabinet, not so easy. All right. Now, one morning I woke up. I just had one of those moments you do when you're an analyst, and all the little pieces made a pattern. And the pattern was, this is a terrorist group. Big one. Hierarchical, structured. They had the whole plan. I mean, they had committees. They had everything you could think of that a big international organization needs. But even though the data was absolutely clear, people didn't believe it. I was it for a while. Why is that? Again, has to do with mindsets, with the stories we tell ourselves. So what are the 3 stories that got in the way? Arabs can't work together. Well, hundreds of years of warfare would make you think that. But these guys in this organization, they fought together in Afghanistan. They're different. Then, terrorist groups have little discrete cells that don't communicate with each other so that if one's arrested, you don't know about the other ones. It's a little hard to operate that way if you're trying to rule the world. I'm just saying. And then thirdly, Arabs aren't good at critical thinking. Yeah, that one sounded pretty racist to me when I first heard it. Having been a college teacher now, though, I know where that came from. The education system had changed over to where everything was by rote. It's the equivalent of multiple choice tests. They weren't taught to think in school. The difference is that these guys were engineers and doctors and computer scientists, right? They had a different kind of education. They could think very well, thank you very much. So none of the stereotypes fit this group. And it took quite a lot of effort to get through people's mindsets and say, your mindset that you've had for 30 years does not apply in this situation. So during this time, bin Laden moved his organization in 92 to Sudan. Started hanging out with every other Sunni terrorist group in the world, and the Iranians, and Hezbollah, and you name it. And stuff started blowing up all over the place. So all these countries complained to the Sudanese, and the Sudanese eventually threw him out. He didn't want anybody to know where they went. He was even afraid the Iranians would try to bring their plane down. So for a few months, from late 95 to mid-1996, we didn't know where he was. And, you know, in that kind of situation, there's a little dark humor that happens. Yeah, where's Waldo, right? Or we would joke about, where's, where in the world is Comrade in San Diego, right? Or we get all these sightings. Bin Laden is in Los Angeles, in Yemen, he's here, he's there, he's everywhere. And so we're like, maybe he has clones or twins, or he can disapparate. But this is where subject matter expertise is important. Those of us who were the long-term subject matter experts, we studied the organization, we knew the individuals, we knew they were going to Afghanistan. And sure enough, that's where they landed. And like any celebrity that's been out of circulation for a while, they want to make a splash, and so this is when Al-Qaeda declares war against the United States. Still not naming themselves as Al-Qaeda. Now, they had been founded in 1988, but they kept their existence secret even from their buddies in the jihad. So it wasn't until there's a defector from Al-Qaeda who came out and said, this is who these guys, this is the organization, and laid it all out for us, that we then kind of could prove that there was an organization. We kind of already pieced it together from other sources, but this was the proof, and it filled in all kinds of great gaps. Yeah. So let me go back for a second. So here you are. You're used to working in the Cold War, where the old James Bond films, you can put one guy out in the field, he infiltrates an organization, yay! That doesn't work so good against terrorist organizations. So my sisters had to invent a new way to attack this organization. And what they did was they took an information collection strategy and turned it into an operational strategy. And what was that? Whack-a-mole. I don't know if you guys have ever played this carnival game. Little mole head pops up somewhere in the world, get them arrested, take all their computers, plug it into your puzzle, go after the next one. So it became dual-hatted. We learned more about the organization, and we got people off the street, all in one blow, right? The problem with this technique is that it doesn't necessarily tell you who, what, when, where, how, why, terrorist attack coming. So we almost got it figured out. We knew there was an attack coming. I had figured out the pattern of multiple simultaneous attacks, which again was hard to convince people of, but whatever. I figured they'd learn how to do car bombings in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. We warned about all of those things. We knew it was going to happen sometime shortly after May 1998, but we couldn't quite get all the way there. Morning of August 7th, 1998, blew up two of our embassies in Africa. I was driving to work. It happened several hours before. Nobody called me. I'm the one and only analyst on this topic. Nobody called me. And that just goes to show that my chain of command didn't take it seriously. However, on the ops side, they did. So the other ladies I worked with, they were in there, they were working away, right? The thing that was an advantage to me, though, was that I was one of these people who's always pushing technology, because I wanted to put the pieces together. And I would work with people in the agency and say, I need this. And they would find technologies, they would try to invent technologies. So my computer was pretty well upgraded. However, back in the day, so this was time when we were switching our entire database system to a new system. And they decided the Counterterrorism Center should get it first because we were the most important, like most in need of it. Well, back in the day, what happened when you upgraded an entire system? It crashed. 7 August 1998, no computers, except for mine. So working with people, very important. Now, we had a little debate in the organization about what to call them. And in the end, I got the pen the next day, and I called them Al-Qaeda. Why did I do that? Because it was on their letterhead. Sometimes really all you need is one piece of data, right? Okay, so now Al-Qaeda's off and running. Now they plan to celebrate the Christian millennium by blowing stuff up all over the world, they and their friends. The US government, now I've read this, I wasn't involved, I was doing a different but related job. But the US government, we took care of everything in the United States. Nothing happened in the US. Other parts of the world weren't so lucky. And it's said that part of the reason for that was they were able to build a nationwide counterterrorism network piggybacking on the Y2K cooperation. So use whatever you can, whatever contacts you have to make things happen. All right, so Al-Qaeda has moved on. They are also an early adopter of technology, of publicly available technology. They went off the grid before the 98 bombings, they went to email. Because of the drawdown in resources after the Cold War was over, NSA didn't have them. Every time Al-Qaeda moved communications, NSA was left in the dark for a while. So we had to scramble to try to get this information through other means. These are all things that Al-Qaeda was doing at the end of the 90s. Steganography, encryption, email, GPS, using GPS for communications. All that, satellite phones, you name it, they did it. Oh, this is us. Need more information! Because what started to happen, early 2001, was we started to get chatter. I know you guys have heard about chatter. A big attack is coming. A huge attack is coming. They're talking in, apocalyptic and Olympic-sized whatever. And everybody is really worried. People were running around with their hair on fire, as you've heard. Warning, 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 warning that this was going to happen. Needing more information, needing more people, needing more legislation to enable us to do some things we couldn't do. And that's frustrating enough. And with the Clinton administration, they finally got it. They got the problem, but they were slow to come across with these other things. And then we switched administrations. And the new guys who came in were old cold warriors who didn't think that non-state actors could do anything on their own, who didn't think a terrorist group was a threat, who didn't even know where Afghanistan was. That's not an exaggeration. And they instituted a 9-month policy review. So, and everything came, no, we didn't go to a halt. We kept working, working, working. But all those things that we were asking for, nothing happened. If you do 9 months from January of 2001, it's too late. It's just too late. So sometimes you need the speed. And it may not be the perfect solution, but it's better than not doing anything. And that's the situation we found ourselves in. So 9/11, we'd been warning like crazy, so none of us were surprised. We had enough information that the FAA was able to identify these guys on the flight manifest within a couple of hours. We were able to do other stuff. We already had a plan in place to do some disruptions and things. So all of that started to happen. This became our office motto. Because let me tell you, those of us, again, subject matter experts, knew that Al-Qaeda had looking at flying airplanes into CIA headquarters, at least, in the past. And so we knew, because we had FAA representatives in the office, that's the idea of a center, we knew that there was a fourth plane missing, right? The 3 crashed into their targets, and then there was a fourth one. And a lot of us were really worried it was headed for CIA. Turns out it probably wasn't. But we're very grateful to the people of Flight 93, and this became our motto. Now, anybody like cat stuff? Our tech folks got an unusual request. All of a sudden, everything we had ever wanted to do, we're being thrown money and personnel and you name it. And at the time, you still wanted to be physically located with each other. It was a lot easier. So our tech guys were told, so most of the agency's gone home for the week. People who are left are counterterrorism or associated stuff. Anything that somebody's not currently using, you can steal. So they did. And they went around to the different parts of the because we moved whole divisions into the counterterrorist center, which meant converting conference rooms and coat cubicles and you name it. And so they just went around and they stole stuff. And then the idea was the agency would put it back before everybody else got back to work. So it was an incredible couple of days they had set up. It was amazing. They also got to spend a lot of technological money doing stuff that we couldn't do before. Our ops guys were off in Afghanistan chasing bin Laden. Again, technology they could figure out within a mile between the CIA and the special forces, they think got within a mile of bin Laden, did not get him. Why? Human factors. Didn't trust the Afghans, didn't have enough military support, were afraid they were going to get ambushed. They paused and bin Laden skedaddled. Now, the military, it takes them a little while to get their thing together, especially because a lot of the military leadership, some military leadership believed in this problem, others didn't. So they didn't have a plan. CIA had a plan since 1998. So the minute 9/11 happened and the president said, what do we do? The CIA said, here's the plan, sir. The president said, go forward. Military took a while. Plus it always takes a while to stand up your forces anyway. So eventually they get to Afghanistan. They do a really good job bombing the Taliban and al-Qaeda positions. Those guys flee to the neighboring countries, and now you have a different problem. You're fighting an enemy who's left the AOR. You can attack them in Afghanistan, but not in Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia, right? Now what are you going to do? You need to gather information, and you need to get the guys. So what's the new version of whack-a-mole? That's where the drone program comes from. I mean, it started before that, but this was the huge plus-up with the drone program. And I'm not defending some aspects of it. I'm just explaining where this comes from. And then you have all sorts of legal issues. Okay, we gather information on a US citizen who's a leader of al-Qaeda. He's in Yemen. We know he's in a car at a particular time. Are we allowed to blow him up? Right? So all these decisions are being made secretly because you don't want to let the guy know that you know where he is, and so we're still dealing with all of this. Then there was the game of shoot the messenger. So now everybody who didn't believe in this before 9/11 wants to cover their ass. CYA, baby. So, of course, we who had been working on it, we had to be the failures, right? Because we couldn't defend ourselves. We didn't connect the dots. All right, that's pretty bad for morale. But the worst part of that is then what you're doing is you're undercutting the reputation of the people who know the most about the people you've just gone to war with. Not a good idea. Still struggling with that problem. And information explodes. I went from reading maybe 300 reports a day to 3,000, just like that. Because again, all the things that we hadn't been allowed to do before 9/11, all of a sudden we can do. Now we have the big data, like the big data. And you've all heard about NSA and all the things that happened there. What are we going to do with all this data? Because now al-Qaeda's gone on to social media. Can we get them in social media? Not yet. So we're evolving as they evolve. It's a matter of necessity to do so. And they go into the deep web, into the 96% of the web that's not searchable on Google. Now we've got to figure out a way to get in there and find these guys. So, what is a poor analyst to do without the data mining tools and the visualization tools and all the things that we have now? We were working on it. I sat on committees while doing the rest of my job, working with technology analyst committees that were joint standing committees to talk about what technologies do we need and to push things forward. And the CIA created a joint venture company called In-Q-Tel to fund a lot of this stuff. NSA and the military and everybody else did that, and so a lot of the innovations you see now are government seed money. Because government has more money than anybody else, let's face it. So what's a poor analyst to do? Well, there's always astrology. Or the magic 8-ball. We shook this so often it actually stuck on this. I preferred the Galadriel snow globe because it was like a crystal ball. And I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. She didn't help me very much, I have to tell you. But in the end, of course, what you're doing is you're doing the same work you've been doing, but now with better tools. So I left in 2007 just before all the new tools started coming out. And I show this graphic. This is from the documentary Manhunt that I'm in, a bunch of other people as well. A young female graphic designer, who happens to be Afghan American, which I think is really cool, actually, put together her own network diagram in a very short period of time using all the new tools. And this thing runs throughout the documentary. It's really amazing. So there's been a huge shift in what you can do and how fast you can do it. Things that used to be manual labor. So Abbottabad, very quickly, because again, I wasn't involved, but how the story goes is that all of these sources and all of these methods worked together to get bin Laden. So it wasn't just big data, and it wasn't just spying, and it wasn't just this or that. It was, you know, a phone number leads to NSA collection, leads to using technology on a Jeep to try to find a phone number in a town, like somebody's driving around, which required new technology because the old technology had to have a big pack on your Jeep. I think the terrorists would spot that. So they had to have new technology to do that, which leads to using a physical asset to follow the guidance to the compound, which then leads to imagery analysis of the compound, which then leads to getting the phone records and the utility records and you see what I mean? You're using all sources to pull all of this together. And eventually, still may not have had 100% assurance. It still comes down to probability, and somebody has to make a decision. And we got them. So, are we safer than we were? Well, this is an academic's attempt to chart the networks in North Africa. Just in North Africa. You have Al-Qaeda main organization in the middle, the central command in the middle, really. And then the parts of the organization around that. And then the next ring out are their formal allies. And then there are people they work with. And then there's the wannabes. And then there's, right? So Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab wanted to be part of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda said, no, you guys are flipping crazy. Right? So now they're working with ISIS. Great. So you take out the head of the organization, and you don't know who's going to follow him. And who followed him is Zawahiri, who's like bin Laden in a lot of respects, but he's not that well liked. And so then you get these spin-offs. And now they're having a war among themselves. Yay. And that's the world we're living in right now. Now, so from this whole process, I've learned a few things I want to share with you. To take a couple minutes to do that. Adaptability. So you identify and you understand the target, person, group, whatever, by listening, not assuming. I'm not going to assume that they're watching television. I'm going to figure out what they're actually doing. And you've heard a lot of that today already. And you're also not going to assume what it is that they're talking about or interested in or how they do it or anything else. You're just going to go see what they do. Now, there's a couple different reasoning methods. So you don't limit yourself to the traditional sources. You want to use outside-in thinking. What's going on in the world that people could take advantage of, and let's see if they're doing it. Cell phones, internet, whatever. Then you also want to ask the right questions about the target. Put yourself in their shoes, inside-out thinking. Here's who they are. It looks like an organization, but I can't find the finance guy. Let me go find him. Right? You got to be good at the small data so you can be good at the big data. I'll give you an example of this. 1993, FBI gets this trove of information. They do put a little bit of it in some reports that the CIA can read. They translate it from the Arabic, and they gist the information. So they said there's this document, it's a big document, and there's some letterhead, and they translated the letterhead as the foundation. Okay, how informative is that? The word in Arabic is Al-Qaeda. What we needed in the record was the actual name, right? 1993. Another case, I teach this kind of stuff, and a young FBI analyst came up to me and said, we ran a case, almost a prosecution, based on a typo in a social security number. So you have to get every small piece right. It is true that you're not going to get it all right, and that big patterns matter. That's all true. But the more you can get the small stuff right, the smarter you're going to be. Embrace ambiguity and uncertainty. And the best technique I know for this, for getting through to people, is to ask, what if? I got Al-Qaeda mentioned in a national strategic document in the mid-90s by saying, What if Ramsey Youssef had succeeded in toppling the World Trade Center? Would you consider that a strategic threat? Yeah. Okay then. Maybe we need to mention these guys alongside the Soviet Union and China. I'm just saying. Use analytical tools, make up new ones. You've had a lot of talk about that. Use everything at your disposal. Use psychological modeling tools. Use business modeling tools. We grabbed sociology, psychology, history. We grabbed anything and everything that would help us understand the target. And then the last thing, again, you've heard a lot of this, transparency and teamwork. You know, our biggest successes came when people just threw the rules out the window and said, all of you guys, look at all this information and let's go. So obviously there needs to be limits. You have to be careful about privacy and leaks and all those things, but it's really a situation where you can share more than you think. At least that's been my experience. So again, thank you for having me, and I wish you guys all the best of luck in your endeavors.